priorities wrong. Getting our priorities wrong. Quick summary of the book of Haggai. The political and religious leaders. I want y'all to hear that from the very beginning. The political and the religious leaders, Zerubbabel and Joshua, along with about 50,000 Jews, returned from exile to see their city in ruins and the temple destroyed. So Haggai is a post-exilic prophet. So now they're trying to make sense of what has happened and why did it happen. Okay, so now you have the political and the religious. And the reason I put this first is because there's a myth going around that politics and religion doesn't mix. It's been mixed from the very beginning. It is mixed in this country. They just call different things, but it's the same thing. So separation of church and state is only popular when it's time for when a church cannot endorse a candidate. That's when it really becomes popular. But there's never really been a separation of church and state. God has never separated church and state. So God has Zerubbabel, who is the governor, and he has Joshua, who serves as the high priest, along with the people that this message is going out to. The book of Haggai consists of 5 short messages and an explanation of the results and the prophet's efforts to persuade his people to resume work on the temple. And we'll go into that as we go a little bit further. 5 sermons is broken out into. Sermon 1, he tells the people they are experiencing economic problems because they have not put first things first. That's the first reason why they're having issues. Second, he assures them of God's presence and the fact that God is approving of what they are doing. Third, he addresses the leaders and people by asking the older members to recall or remember the glory of the old temple, Solomon's temple, which we talked about, and encourage the new generation that will bring treasures from other nations. This will make the new temple even greater than the old temple. And the temple that we will be talking about is Solomon's temple. We talked about it last week, how Solomon's temple was just off the chain. It was, a couple of weeks we've talked about that. It was very expensive. It was a serious undertaking financially. It drained the people. It overtaxed the people, which eventually led to the division that occurred. And that's how we have the Southern Kingdom and the Northern Kingdom. The city or the state, the 12 tribes divided over the issue of the taxation because of the exquisite, overpriced, elaborate, whatever you want, whatever adjectives you want to throw out there, temple. And so now they're set to sort of remember and reflect and compare. The 4th sermon, he returns to the 1st sermon and links worship, work, and the blessings of God together. 5, the 5th sermon is a personal message to Zerubbabel announcing the overthrow of the kingdoms and the role that Zerubbabel will play as a symbol of Messiah in God's kingdom on earth. And these are the scripture references that we have to that, but I'm certain that we will be reading them a little later. But this is just a quick summary. Now, Haggai, we don't really know a whole lot about him as a person. We do know that his name means festival or festive or my feast. He was probably born while the children of Israel were in exile in Babylon. That's when he was probably, no doubt, he was born. His sermons were directed almost exclusively to 2 people, Zerubbabel and Joshua. His entire ministry, the 5 sermons he preached His length of ministry that God used him during that time span was only 4 months long. He could be considered a one-trick pony. He was unashamedly single-minded in doing the one thing that God called him to do. And you know, that really should make us think sometimes that a lot of us want to be able to do a whole bunch of stuff. But if the Lord has only given you a call or a gift to do one thing, you need to be like KFC and do that one thing well. Do it right. Don't worry about gifts that the Lord hasn't given you. Don't worry about trying to do things that God has not gifted you to do. Concentrate, work on that gift or gifts that God has given you and be the best that you can with it. And he's an example. He had one message in mind. He was single-minded in his message, and that was to do whatever it took to encourage the people to restart the building program. This was his goal. This was what he was focused on. And after 4 years of encouraging by Haggai, the temple was rebuilt. 20 years after it was first started, and 70 years after it was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. His message is a helpful check of our priorities and how we are investing our time and our money. And I'll say this, and I'll say this again, that if you want to know what's important to someone, if you want to know their priorities, if you want to know what's really important to them, look at their calendar, look at their checkbook. And that lets you know everything about what's important to them. And whether it's a written down calendar, Franklin planners, I don't think we use those stuff no more. I don't think we use Palm Pilots no more. Just grab their phone. Grab their phone and you'll see what's important to them. You can go through the call list and see who all they talk to, how many times they talk to them. You can look at their calendar, see what they have marked in their calendar, what alarms go off, and their checkbook. Or pull up their app to their checking, and that'll let you know to their bank app, and that'll let you know where their priorities are. And if you want to know what your priorities are, do that. Look in your phone, look in your calendar, look at your checkbook. And that'll let you know where your priorities are. It's just that simple. Now, what's the background behind Haggai? Because I've thrown some stuff out to you. I've said 20 years after this and 70 years after that and 4 years. And so you may be wondering, what's the backdrop for this message? What time is going on? Because remember, we've always mentioned that prophets show up, whether it's pre-exilic, during the exile, or post-exilic, when there are issues of social, political, economic, and all three sometimes combined issues that are going on with his people, with the prophet's people, and then the prophet has a word from God of how God's people can deal with the crises. So remember that. 70 years earlier, Judea had been conquered and taken into captivity by Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian Empire. Judah had been reduced to ruins, and the whole kingdom laid waste. Some, however, were left to stay, and they were eventually joined by others who in turn fled the destruction of Babylon by King Cyrus. So first of all, you had the destruction of Judea or Judah by Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian Empire. Now there are some folks who stayed around, who never left. When everything went down, they hung in there, they hung around. And now you have others who fled the destruction of Babylon by King Cyrus. These would eventually become known as the Samaritans. And you all remember Jews and Samaritans never had a good relationship. The Samaritans are those who moved in and stayed in the areas where the Jews originally stayed after the destruction. And so this is that love, hate fest, if you will. And this is why this was a group that the Jews detested. Their prayer, the average good Jewish man during that particular time had a prayer for three things. They thank God that they wasn't a leper. They thank God that they wasn't a woman. And they thank God that he was a Samaritan. So these were the three things that the average Jew during that particular time in their prayer life, this is what they were thankful to God that they were not. A leper, a Samaritan, a woman. So these Jews or these Samaritans would become a thorn to the post-exilic Israelites. The first group, because there are three returns back to the promised land. This is the first group to return. It was about 50,000. And after a good start, they return. You know how it is. We in trouble. We call on the Lord. The Lord look out for us. The Lord blesses us. We get excited off the blessings of God. You know, and sometimes when we down and out, we'll make, Lord, if you get me out this jam, I'm going to do right. Lord, if you just bless this situation, I'm going to do right. Lord, if it's any kind of way you can do it, we have our list of what we're going to do for God if the Lord just gets us through this situation. No doubt, while they were in exile, the prayer was, Lord, if we ever get back to our homeland, we're going to worship you. We're going to do what we need to do. We're going to act right, which is it's the cyclical, or it's the cycle of the Old Testament. Remember, children of Israel get in trouble. The Lord comes, they cry out to the Lord comes to the rescue. They act right 10 good minutes. Then they forget about what the Lord has done. They go back to their contrary ways. And then the Lord says they cry out again. The Lord sends a deliverer. This is what the book of Judges is all about. It's a cycle. They've always had this cycle. And guess what? We're in the same cycle. We do the same thing. And so they started off working good, working on the temple, but then they stopped. And they didn't stop for a day. They didn't stop for a couple of weeks. They stopped for at least 16 years that the temple, which was everything to them, which was where they actually believed that the Lord dwelt in the temple, they decided to go on a pause. So for those years, that wasn't they were not working. Nothing was going on. Okay. Interpreting the repeated crop failures as signs that Yahweh was angry because the temple remained incomplete. The prophet, listen to this, he urges the governor, that's the political, and the high priest, which is the religious, to persuade the people to return to the project. So you have the political leader, you have the religious leader working together to do the will of God. No fakes, no phonies, no photo ops, the real deal. And when they combine and bring it together, the people go back to work with enthusiasm. Because remember, in 4 years, they accomplished this. Now, Haggai also conveys God's plan to do some shaking. Shake the heavens, shake the earth, and to overthrow kingdoms and establish Zerubbabel as the signet ring. And I'll go into a little bit more detail as we go a little bit further, the significance of the signet ring and why that was so powerful and what did that symbolize, the signet ring. Again, if you have any questions, you can unmute, ask questions, or you can put your questions or comments in the chat. The people had become so obsessed because we want to know what happened. They came back, they started working, but all of a sudden they chilled. This is part of what happened. They became obsessed with their own security and their own personal comfort, possibly influenced by the Samaritans, who the Jews would not allow to participate in the rebuilding process. And so the Samaritans was sort of like this: if you ain't gonna let us participate, then we're gonna stop you from doing what you need to do. And we all know some folks that's like that. If they can't be in it, they want to tear it down. That's what's happening currently right now in Washington. The election is over. The results are clear. Every little tactic they've been trying, they tried to shut stuff down last night, didn't work. We are in the midst of a pandemic. The numbers are soaring. And if you got hospitals, you got nurses, you have doctors pleading for the information that the incoming president is going to need to tackle this. But we have a selfish individual who is only concerned about himself, but he's been consistent. So this is not new. This shouldn't be surprising to anybody. He's been consistent about only himself. And so instead of us trying to gather this information around so that we can hit into some of the numbers are exploding. That's why right now here in Michigan, as well as all the Midwest governors got together and had a meeting yesterday about how they were going to try to slow down the infection rate, because we had over 5,000 people infected yesterday. These numbers that we've been dealing with in the last week are higher than anything we had in May, in March, in April. Now, unfortunately, instead of them working along with the governor, who obviously knew what she was doing, because at one point we were the third leading nation, we were the third leading state with the infections, she brought it down. Disproportionately, as a people, we were being, we were dying, Black and brown were dying at a rapid pace. All that has brought down proportionately now. And so we have some in our state Congress that stripped her of her power. And now when we're dealing with this pandemic, they're hunting. They're hunting while we're facing this pandemic. So this is the kind of attitude the Samaritans had, that if we can't be involved, we're just going to tear it down. Now, the people were disillusioned. They were discouraged. They were lacking the motivation to complete the task at hand. Economic conditions were bad, and the tiny post-exilic community struggled to survive. So this is part of the crisis. Remember I told you, when prophets show up, they don't just show up because they have nothing else to do. They don't just show up because they're having some convention or they want people to come down to the stadium to sing their praises and give prophecies. No, that's not how real prophets work. They show up when there is a social, economic, political crises, or all of the above that is affecting their people, and they come with a word for the people from thus saith the Lord. Here's another example. Conditions are bad economically. You got a tiny community struggling, and now they're trying to figure out, what does the Lord have to say about this situation? Let's take a closer look at Haggai. In their last three attacks, the Babylonians, and remember who the Babylonians were, they were part of the group that a couple of the prophets had issues with, that the Lord would use them to punish God's people when they were worse than. You remember that? The Babylonians were led by Nebuchadnezzar, and we are familiar with Nebuchadnezzar. If you remember anything about the three Hebrew boys and Daniel, we know that he was in charge. We know that he was an ego maniac. We know that he was a narcissist. He actually could be the president currently right now. That's the kind of mentality he had. He captured Jerusalem. He destroyed the temple. And then he took most of the people away from their homeland and deported them to Babylon. Now, I give him credit. He took the cream of the crop. That's why the three Hebrew boys and Daniel, they were not the average persons. They were well trained. They were well educated, and that's why he took them and made them a part of his leadership. I give him credit for that, because remember, Nebuchadnezzar said when he took them in, he wanted them, he gave orders to the kitchen crew, give them the very best. I want them well trained, I want them well fed. And the three Hebrew boys refused to eat the king's food and said, you know what, we're going to stick to the diet of our ancestors, of our parents, of our foreparents. We're going to stick to the diet of our people. And they refused to eat from the king's table. And they said, tell you what, king, let us test it out. And after a certain period of time, if we're not looking good, then we'll eat your stuff. So remember, when he took the people, he took the cream of the, he took the well-known folks. He took the people that had names and people had names, and he took them in for the whole purpose of making them part of his leadership, which was a brilliant move. Now, 70 years later, Babylon is now declining in its power and has now been overthrown by King Cyrus. Cyrus has control of a countless amount of immigrants or kidnapped citizens of another nation. Hint, hint. He issues a decree allowing them to return to their homeland to reestablish and reinstate their national gods so that they can reestablish their relationship with their gods. They were not the gods that he worshiped, but he had respect for their gods and said, you know what? You all can go back and do what you've been doing. Now, this was not only a political decision, but it was prophecy. Isaiah, someone can read Isaiah 44 and 28.
Who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he shall fulfill all my purpose, saying of Jerusalem, she shall be built, and of the temple, your foundation shall be laid. The English Standard Version.
Okay, and so this is a prophecy that is fulfilled. Now, one thing I'm going to say this, you can always, and the Bible always told us, you know, because a lot of people are always, you know, people always going to throw out what the Lord told them. And, you know, I'm always respectful when the person says what God has told them, but I also know the Lord has given us a test to tell. In the biblical days, if a person said the Lord told them something and whatever they said happened, was going to happen, did not happen, that was grounds for them to be stoned to death. That's how false prophets was to be dealt with. Well, guess what? There were a whole lot of false prophets and prophet lying over this past election about who was going to win. But I'll say this, if God tells you something, trust me, it's going to happen. You can bank on it. Now, if it's just somebody's pinto beans talking to them, or you know, I don't know what they may have had for dinner, didn't agree with them, they're not hearing from God, then it's going to be a lie. And we've seen a lot of that. You know, we have folks calling on ancient African spirits and all this other stuff, and it didn't happen. But that's a sure way of knowing if it's a real prophecy of God, it will come to pass. So that's why you can't listen to everybody. Not all Jews wanted to accept Cypher's offer because Babylon had become their home, and almost all would have been born there. Remember, not all slaves wanted emancipation from slavery. You know, so people were sort of, you know, how could black folks do this, and how could they? Not all slaves wanted to be emancipated. Every slave insurrection that didn't happen, from Digmont Vesey to my main man, Nat Turner, it happened because there were other slaves who told. Because for them, they were okay with living a life of oppression. And you know, the reality of it is that they call it Stockholm Syndrome now, where a person can be kidnapped and then they sympathize with their kidnapper? Well, we have some of that. See, what we don't understand is that the psychological effects of slavery, we still deal with as Black folks right now. Because we have a lot of African Americans who believe that white folks' ice is colder. They believe their water is wetter. You know, for whatever reason. Anything that's told to them by someone not of color is the gospel truth. If you tell them the same thing, they're not going to take it because of what you look like. And so this is the same mindset. None of this stuff is new. So here you are away from your homeland and you don't even want to go back because your mindset. But remember, when they left Egypt, in the midst of traveling through the desert, you had some of the folks was murmuring to Moses, saying, you know, you brought us out here to die, and, you know, we've been better off. You just left us where we was. They'd rather have stayed in slavery than to explore the frontier of freedom. So that's the way it goes. That's the way it goes. So none of this stuff should be new to us. I'm giving you an example just to show you of how, because if you like I am, you're wondering why in the world would they not want to be able to go back to their homeland? But sometimes you can take on the personality of your oppressor, where they will oppress you and you'd rather be oppressed than liberated. Now, 50,000 Jews jumped at this offer, and Governor Zerubbabel and High Priest Joshua led them back home. Let me say it again. The governor and the high priest, political and religion, working together to do God's will. At first, everything was good. This is like a relationship. You know, I watched some of these little divorce court, you know, and you know, when they ask, you know, what happened, you know, at first, it's always good at first. It's always great at first. They get back for 2 years, foundation is laid, the altar was built, worship was reestablished, reinstated, but trouble is looming. Why is trouble looming? Because the Samaritans offered to help, the Jews refused, and stung by this denial of their assistance, Samaritans changed their tactics. Again, you know, we try to suppress the vote. That don't work. We try to slow the mail down. That don't work. So now when the votes are counted, we're going to say they don't count because it's Tuesday. No evidence, nowhere. We just don't want them to count because we lost. Same kind. They just changed their tactics. They never had any good intention for the Jews. The Jews knew that, didn't fool with them. And then they got mad, and then they changed the tactics. They discouraged them, and then they made them afraid to build, and they bribed counselors against them to frustrate their purpose. I mean, this is, I can't make this stuff up. Sort of what Lindsey Graham tried to do when he went down there and called the Secretary of State in Georgia, trying to, in a roundabout way, tell him to discredit some votes. But here's a man that's a conservative, and he says that he has to follow the law. He would love to win the election, but he's not going to do nothing illegal for that to happen. He's getting death threats. His wife is getting death threats. But, you know, that's the funny thing about God. God can use whomever God wants to use, and God always has some folks somewhere that's going to do what the Lord say do. Even when it's not popular, they're going to do what's right. Now, the schemes worked so well that the Jews gradually lost interest in the project, and they did nothing that they were supposed to do. Remember, for 2 years, they was on track. They were rebuilding the temple. They got a little distraction, and that's why we have to be careful that we do not become distracted, because a lot of things that happens is meant to distract us from our purpose, from our goal. And that, you know, Satan is brilliant. However, I read a quote today that says, I want to read it to you because I think it's befitting of what we're currently dealing with. I think it's befitting of what we this is what it says. It says that evil is incapable of a perfect plan. So in other words, no matter what you try to form, when it's done from the reins of evil, it will never be a perfect plan, which sort of backs my understanding that no weapon formed against us shall prosper. Didn't say that the weapon wouldn't be formed, didn't say the weapon wouldn't be used, but it said that the weapon wouldn't prosper. It wouldn't go nowhere because God was going to take care of the nonsense. Now, King Cyrus dies, and then King Darius takes over. Now, and because there's been a smooth transition of power between the two leaders, he discovers that the official records say that the Jews had Cyrus's authority to rebuild the temple. Now, what he does, he doesn't try to strip down what his predecessor did. He seen that it was the right thing to do, and he endorsed what was right to do. And so he now gives his endorsement to these Jews to go back to their homeland. King Darius then directs, because of course, whenever you're doing something for the Lord, you're going to always have opposition. And again, I don't understand folks who work for the Lord, who are called by God according to his purpose, all that other stuff we like to say, and then get bent out of shape when trouble comes your way. I keep telling you all the time, if the devil isn't bothering you, the devil already has you. The devil is only going to bother you when you're doing the will of the Lord. So you should count it joy when the devil comes your way. That means you're doing something right. If you're not doing nothing, the devil ain't bothering you. Why? Why would the devil bother you? If you ain't kicking up no dust, you ain't making no noise, the devil don't pay you no attention. He goes to the governor Tatii and others and tells them to stop their opposition to the work that these folks are doing for the Lord. Someone read Ezra 6, verse 7, and then jump to verse 12.
Leave the governor and the leaders of the Jews alone, so they can work on that temple of God's as they rebuild it.
And then verse 12.
Okay, and may the God who put his name on that place wipe out any king or people who dares defy this decree and destroy the temple of God at Jerusalem. I, Darius, have issued an official decree. Carry it out precisely and promptly. That's from the Message.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, see, when God has something in place, can't no man, can't no woman, can't no authority on this planet stop what God is going to do. And that shouting material right there lets you know that regardless of what's planned against you, if God is for you, that's what's going to happen. Can't no power on earth hold him down. Listen to what they were trying to do. They were going to try to keep them from working. Remember now, when Nehemiah was working, trying to get the wall rebuilt and everything, they had to work as well as pray because they had the threats of distraction, the threats of attack being at them, and they watched as well as pray. Now these people around the same time, they're working, doing what they got to do, and the king says, you know what? Don't bother them, because if you bother them, you're going to have to deal with us. And no matter how much you bully, one thing about it, a bully is a bully till they get hit in the mouth or till they face somebody that's just as big as they are, then they usually going to eat humble pie. That's just the way it goes. It worked back then, and it's still working today. It was during this time of all this stuff happening that God raised up Haggai and Zechariah to join with Zerubbabel in reigniting the enthusiasm to complete the work, and 4 years later, it's done. The temple is completed in 4 years. Now, there were some things that happened in that 4 year span. In order to get the people's attention, Haggai had to preach. First sermon, he preached about the fact that they had stopped working on rebuilding the temple, and they consecrated their efforts on their own priorities. Now remember, we talked about the economic issues that was going on, and we talked about it was an economic little drought going on, and the resources was low. But then look what happens in the text. They had spent money, time, and energy on their own homes. See, that's how it is sometimes. I ain't got enough money to get the Lord tithes and offering. But then you hooking up your own house. You driving the latest and greatest. You wearing the most expensive name brands and all the other stuff, but you don't have money to give your tithes and offerings to God. And then the Lord identifies, let you know that they was living in luxurious homes when the Lord said paneled, very specific, because paneled housing means that was a luxury. This wasn't just some little apartment. This was a luxurious home to be able. So they had the resources, but they just wasn't going to give the resources to the Lord. That was for them. And whenever, and see, this is why, although scripture does not ever denounce folks for being rich, but Jesus does warn us of our resources. And that's why Jesus talks more about material and money than Jesus talks about salvation. If you don't believe me, you get your Bible with the words of Christ in red and you do the research. Because Jesus knew the preoccupation we would have with money and how that would cause some issues. And that's why Jesus said the love of money is the root of all evil. Not money itself, but the love where we would pursue anything to get it. We'll sell our own family members to get it. We'd rather have folks in harm's way in a pandemic. We'd rather politicize a health issue than to slow stuff down for the fear of losing a few dollars, which you can replace, but you can't replace somebody's life. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Whenever you put profits over people, you're going to have problems. From the very first prophets, when we first started talking, I told you this. This is consistent Bible. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure this out. If you've been following along since we've been on this journey with the minor prophets, this is something that has been a consistent theme, that whenever money is put before people, you got issues. It's the prioritizing of money. They have the money, but it's just not going to the church. People have time, I make it, I just stay spiritually good. I won't be at church. Okay. But you at the mall, you at the movies, you at dinner, you can go, you feel good enough to go everywhere else but the church. Then when something goes down, then you want the church to run and make you a priority to them when the church was never a priority to you. Now, I know one thing, when we finally do go back into the building, I don't think we're going to have many people missing service in the building. Sometimes you got to lose something to realize what you lost. Some things I think this pandemic is teaching us so many different levels, Christians, not worldly folks, Christians on so many different levels. I think in one hand, we worship the building and not the God of the building. On other hands, I think that, some of us were slagging and we were slackers. And now we're realizing just how important fellowship with your brothers and sisters really is. I think there's a lot of lessons that's coming out of this. A lot of lessons is coming out. And some lessons we still going to learn as we continue to go forward. So God asked the questions. verse 1, 5 through 6. Someone read that. Haggai, verse 1, 5, and 6.
Now, therefore, thus says the Lord of hosts, consider your ways. You have sown much and harvest little. You eat, but you never have enough. You drink, but you never have your fill. You clothe yourselves, but no one is warm. And he who earns wages does so to put them into a bag with holes.
This is what was happening to their resources. It was never enough. You know why it wasn't enough? Because they were misusing God's resources. See, this is the problem that I have with economies that are set up to make a few people super, super rich at the expense of other folks going poor. These are not your resources. These are God's resources. How dare you take God's water, put it in a bottle, and sell it to me? How dare you take God's air, put it in a tube, and sell it to me? How do you take God's resources and then make me pay for them? You gonna make a profit off of God's resources? Are you serious? Please don't think that God is asleep on this stuff. How in the world are we going to take God's resources and then make a profit off of God's resources? So, Haggai said, okay, I'm going to help y'all see why y'all going through this. I'm going to help you see why your money isn't stretching, why your money is always funny, your change is always strange. I'm going to let you see why you eating like a pig, but you never full. You drinking like a fireman or a sailor. You're never satisfied. You got all this money you gathering, but you stay broke. I know a whole lot of people that fit this category right now. They live their lives as though there are holes in their pockets. Why? Because they have not understood that whatever resources you have, it is God's loan to you. We are stewards. That's why I keep preaching in our church. You are blessed to be a blessing. God does not bless you to be a hoarder. God does not bless you to amass and amass and amass and amass at the expense of other folks who could be helped. Now, I will say this and I'll say this again. There is a difference between folks who are able-bodied and who do not want to work. For the Bible says, if you don't work, you don't eat. But I also always, because I hear this argument a whole lot, but I never hear people make the same argument for companies who don't want to pay taxes. That's not called welfare. I don't know why. Anything that is governmental supplemented is welfare. And I promise you that corporate welfare, corporate tax breaks is much more expensive to the economy than these folks on SNAP and these folks on the regular welfare. I promise you that. The budgets ain't even close. But see, that again, if God has blessed you with resources, your resources is to be a blessing to someone else. The resources God has given you, now I'm not saying that you got to give it all away like the ecstatics, but what I am saying is that my goal should not to be to amass as much money as I can while I'm living on earth. My goal is to try to be a blessing, that if God blesses me with income, if God blesses me with resources, how can I be a blessing to someone else? Because God operates in a reciprocal situation. You know what their problem was? They were not cheerful givers, they were cheerful keepers. That was their problem. They had got their priorities wrong, And they were more intent on spending money on their own comfort and their own pleasures than supporting the work of the Lord. That's why this title is entitled Getting Our Priorities Wrong. The minute we become first priority, it's jacked up. Then Haggai addressed the 70 plus crowd who would have seen Solomon's temple, who could remember Solomon's temple and doubted if this replacement could match it. I mean, because again, it was splendor. It was just out. It was off the chain, as the young folks would say. It was off the hook. Whatever the modern vernacular says about something that was just, just opulent. There you go. That's a good word. Opulent. The opulence of Solomon's temple was just mind blowing. It was just, it was like Dubai. And there's no way in the world the material that these folks are using now can even compare. But listen to what God tells them to do. Someone read the 2nd chapter, verses 4 and 5.
I have it for you, Pastor.
Okay.
Yet now be strong, O Zerubbabel, said the Lord, and be strong, O Joshua, son of Josedek, the high priest, and be strong, all ye people of the land, saith the Lord, and work, for I am with you, saith the Lord of hosts, according to the word that I covenanted with you when ye came out of Egypt. So my spirit remaineth among you, fear ye not.
That's the best assurance you can get. For the Lord, see, this was a problem that they had that we often have. We often feel that if something costs more, if something is bigger, then that automatically means that it's better. But you can have a lemon and pay you can pay $75,000 for a lemon. Every car that come off the lot is not a good car. I don't care how much you pay for it. They mistook bigger for being better. They mistook opulence for having more value. But according to God, that wasn't what the Lord wanted. Because notice, the Lord did not tell them to retract the materials that was used in Solomon's temple. Lord told them to take another route. He gave them more normal materials for them to use to construct the house this time around. God then declared that God was going to shake some things up. One of my favorite sermons, when God shakes the house. Haggai 2 and 7. Read that for me, please.
And I will shake all nations, and the desire of all nations shall come. And I will fill this house with glory, said the Lord of hosts.
Now, this is not only talking about just the local governments then. This is talking about all the way around. So part of this is in the midst of being fulfilled even as we speak. God at some point is going to shake nations. And again, for those that read the book of Revelations, you're going to discover that you won't see anything that looks like America. So you are not tripped, but at the end of the day, I'm not tripping because when the tribulation period comes, I don't plan on being here anyway. So whatever happens to America, that's between God and God's judgment. I don't plan on being here then during the tribulation period, but look what Revelation says, verse 5 and 9.
And they sung a new song, saying, Thou art worthy to take the book and to open the seals thereof. For thou wast slain and hast redeemed us to God by the blood out of every kindred and tongue and people and nation.
Key word there, every. So no one nation has a monopoly on God. No one people has a monopoly on God. Revelation says every tongue, every nation, God has died for, which means there is no respect of person. Everyone who was counted in the tree of life, because their name is in the Lamb's book of life, because of the redemptive work of Calvary by Jesus, everybody's invited to the party. So I don't have time for folks that discriminate against anybody, because the word says everybody's invited. Now, I don't mean everybody coming, but the invitation is available to everyone. Then God encourages Zerubbabel with an assurance that all the enemies of God's people will be defeated. Chapter 2, verses 21 and 22. Read that, please.
Speak to Zerubbabel, governor of Judah, saying, I'm about to shake the heavens and the earth, and to overthrow the throne of kingdoms. I'm about to destroy the strength of the kingdoms of the nations, and overthrow the chariots and their riders, and the horses and their riders shall go down, every one by the sword of his brother.
In other words, when God gets to shaking things up, no one is exempt. No one is exempt when God gets ready to shake some stuff up. Now, he also mentions Zerubbabel being seen as the signet ring. And I told you about the signet ring. I said I would explain a little bit later. We've come to that point now. It had three things that was connected to the signet ring. First of all, it spoke of security. A signet was a stone that was intentionally set into a ring and engraved with the owner's personal symbol. It was used to endorse official documents by being pressed into soft clay or wax, so guaranteeing that the documents were authentic. It's sort of like we have now, where we have watermarks for, for like when it comes to birth certificates. If you don't have that raised printing, I used to be graphic arts person, and I used to do graphic arts and graphic printing. So raised printing means that the document or whatever is raised, and that's given a special something to mean that it's authentic. See, you could take, and that's why when they tell you for your passports, when they ask for your marriage license, and when they ask for all these things, there's a seal that authenticates this as being the original. And so the signet ring was like a stamp that guaranteed that the documents was authentic, because unless they had the signature or the signet imprint of the king's ring, they couldn't just tell somebody, I'm speaking on behalf of the king. They wasn't buying that. They had to press down, and they had to see that the king actually, how we know it's the king, because the king's signature is on it. So a lot of stuff we're doing now is not new. It's not new. And then someone even mentioned college transcripts. Yep, when you get in college transcripts for jobs and stuff like that, they want the original, with the original seal from the college or university to verify this is something that somebody did on their home computer, found the school's logo, and tried to pass it off as being authentic. Because again, in order for there to be a counterfeit, there has to be an original. Now, it speaks of beauty. That's the second thing. So the first thing, it speaks of its ability for authenticity. Now it speaks of beauty. And then the last thing, it speaks of authority. Now, the seal of a king's signet ring represented the king, so that any document that was sealed with the ring had regal authority and power. So in other words, if I was bidding for the king and I come to you saying the king said such and such, you looking at me like, man, you don't know nothing about the king. All of a sudden, I pull out a scroll and you look at the scroll at the bottom and you see the imprint of the king's ring. That was the king speaking, and I was just a mouthpiece. Zerubbabel was, the Lord called him the signet, a symbol of signet. He would become a descendant of King David. And we know why that's important, because he becomes a member of the nation's royal family. And we know why that's important, because if you look in the lineage in the book of Matthew, when they're going through the lineage of Jesus, you're going to find Zerubbabel's name. But he was God's signet ring, gave him much greater status and authority as directed the people into the temple rebuilding project. Again, his goal was, as the governor, was to combine with the preacher, combine with the religious leaders, and do thus said the Lord, encourage the people that if we want to get things on track, we got to go back and do it God's way. That hasn't stopped. First things first, things generally go better, things generally go right when we set our priorities right. What's our priorities? God first. No matter what you do, God has to be your first priority. Obeying God, doing the will of God, seeking God. It cannot be money. It cannot be fame. It cannot be fortune. If whatever you're going to do, if you want it to be successful, you have to start it off with God being first. You're doing it to the glory of God. Can God get glory from what you're doing? Will God get praise from what you're doing? Or will it be that fake stuff that he told Amos, I don't even want no parts of that. It stinks in my nostrils. You're going through the motions. You're actors. You're pretenders. I don't want that fake. I don't want that fake praise. I want the real stuff that's connected to worship. That's connected not only to worship, but it's connected to work. Again, you can't be lazy doing the will of God. Those two don't go together. Well, if you ever seem like you out of alignment, you ain't even got to go to Bell Tire. You ain't got to go to Discount Tire. All you have to simply do is check your alignment. Check your priority list. And you will discover how quickly, if you are out of line, because it happens, life happens. You know, none of us are, myself, I'm first one in line. Things will happen in life. You get all excited about certain stuff and then you start going that way. But you always got to be able to look back and see what is God saying. And are you in line with God's will? And if you're not, if you know the Lord, it's not a hard thing. It's a quick fix. Get back in line, make God your priority, and you'll be back in alignment with God has to say to you. Now, again, we often, because people be testing lying and prophet lying and all this other stuff that's going on here, they got some folks making you think that the minute you follow Jesus, now you're about to have a red ticketed parade. You ain't gonna have no issues, you're gonna have no problems, you're gonna have no struggles. You can speak to the mountain will automatically fall. You can speak those things as though they were. You can say, I'm gonna be a millionaire. All that stuff is nice. But everything that you speak ain't necessarily got nothing to do with the will of God for you. God knows right now some of us can't handle $1 million. We can't even have $250,000. We would lose our mind and God wouldn't see us. Not only would the church wouldn't see you, God wouldn't see you. So God knows what God is doing. That's why the Bible speaks of, if you are faithful over a few things, then I can trust you to make you rule over many. There's no way in the world right now I'm going to give any of my kids $100 and then take them to the store. I already know what's going to happen. They're going to buy toys. They're going to buy candy. They're going to buy all the kind of stuff that they don't need because they got the money. So as a wise parent, I limit what I give them free money for. I don't expect them to go grocery shopping like an adult that's going to come back with vegetables and fruits and things that's going to bring nourishment into their bodies because they're children. So as a parent, I take care of that. Once they show me that they can be trusted, once they show me that they're mature, then I give them a couple more dollars when they go out. Then I'll give them a couple more. And that's the way God does with us. When you are faithful over a few things, then I give you some more. But if you can't handle the little bit, why would God give you more? Why? God's ways are above God's thinking is above our thinking. And if I got enough sense to figure that out, how much more sense does God have over us? Again, HAGGAI is a wonderful book that describes what happened when people of God were excited about freedom. They made a commitment, but they was working. They got distracted. They took a 16-year hiatus. They was hooking up their houses. God's temple was in ruins. They wasn't concerned about. They had the foundation laid. They was cool with that. And we do the Lord the same way. We down and out. The Lord bless us. Get a couple pennies to rub together over our lunch money. We lose our mind. And then now all of a sudden, the things that God had told us to do, or even some of the things we said we would do if the Lord blessed us financially, we forget about all that. But God has a way of reminding us that when you put God first, and that's why I tell people all the time, when you come to your tithes and offerings, give God what is right, and then ask God to give you the wisdom to spend what's left, and you'll always be in good shape. I ain't promising you're going to drive a Maybach. I'm not promising you're going to live in Beverly Hills, Michigan. I ain't promising you're going to have, millions of dollars. I ain't promising all that stuff. What I will promise you is that you will never beg for bread. I will promise you the Lord will bless you with some things when the Lord can trust you with some things. And then when your priorities are right, you don't lose your mind when you get a couple of dollars. You ain't wearing every dollar you get. You ain't driving every dollar you get because you got enough sense to realize those are just things, and things will pass away. Because God can trust you when you put God first. So that's our word for tonight, getting our priorities wrong. That's how we get our priorities wrong, when we don't put God first. No matter what you do, put God first. Make God the priority in whatever you have. If it's a marriage, if it's a relationship, if it's a job, put God first. Make God the number one priority. You Amen. Are new at the church. My list of priorities, I told you from the very beginning, my priorities is God, my family, then church. A lot of my pastors and colleagues and old school, God bless them, they meant well. But the Bible does, I think it's Paul, somewhere in his writings, where he says that if you cannot handle the affairs of your house, don't come to God's house trying to do stuff. And I think that's where sometimes we as pastors mess up, because our order is God, the church, then our family, or the church, God, then our family. Because the church sometimes feeds our ego. and we feel like we are known because of who we are or because of who we pastor. I love GMBC. There's no other church on the planet I think it's any better than GMBC. And I know God custom made GMBC for me to lead during this season, but trust me, I'm known outside of GMBC. So I don't have to make a God out of GMBC. It is a place that God has sent me to serve. And I'm honored and blessed to be able to serve there. But there's more to me than GMBC. Because my first allegiance is to God, not no church, not no denomination, not anything else. My first allegiance is to God first. And because I set my priorities straight, everything else falls into place. Because if I will sell out my family, how comfortable would you feel I won't sell you out? If I would spend time with you instead of being at home, if something is going wrong in my family and I'm there preaching to you and teaching to you, and there's something wrong at home, then what assurance would you really have that if something was wrong with you, that I would be there for you? Again, I think a lot of old school, they meant well. And I'm not dogging them out, but I learned that ain't how it works. Because I've seen folks who give their lives and put everything on the line, put their families on the line, and then the minute they drop dead, or the minute the church throws them out, then their family's busted up over the church. That's not how it works. When you put God first, God will never take you through anything that God cannot bring you through. God will never allow you to encounter a storm that God is not the master of. I promise you that. So again, get your priorities right, put God first, and then watch how things will work out in your lives. And that's what HAGGAI is a reminder of. Get your priorities straight, put God first, and when you put God first, the rest falls into place. There's only one spot God fits. It's like a puzzle. There's only one spot that's appropriate fit for God, and that's at the top. The only way it's going to work. God bless you. God keep you. I don't know if we're a little early. I'm okay with that. Again, we are not meeting next week, of course, as we're preparing for the holidays. I pray that everyone will heed the words of the governor and really be thoughtful. If you're going to have that dinner, please, my brother, please, my sister, really only have it with folks that you're living with currently right now. The virus is rapid. It's not a hoax. It's not it's nothing to be made of political football. It is a health crisis that this country is going through. And so we want to be wise. We want to be smart. Yes, I have all the faith in the world. I know God's a healer. I told you my story. My children are a direct testament of God's healing power. But I promise you, I am not going to voluntarily jump into a body of water with sharks and piranha with my arm bleeding to prove that God can heal me or keep me. I got enough sense. I got common sense. I'm not going to do that. So please mask up, be wise, be intelligent. God has also given us common sense. And I don't think that's one of the senses that a lot of us like to use. And please don't confuse faith with foolishness. Noah stayed in the ark for a whole year and it only rained for 40 days. Think about that. We will have next Thursday, Thanksgiving, we will have our traditional service. Now, you know, for those of us that come to our Thanksgiving service, we have an hour of thanks. It's going to be the same time, 10 o'clock. Only difference is we're going to be on Zoom. We're going to read scripture. We're going to sing songs, and we're going to testify. We don't want to test a lie. We want to testify on what we're thankful for and what God has been good to us for. This year has been a doozy, no question about it, but we're still here. So that in itself is more than enough reason to tell the Lord, thank you. We're still here, and the Lord has blessed many of us. We want to be mindful. We want to keep the Bibbins family in our prayers. Sister Stacy's father, we will have his services on Friday, and then Deacon Haney, his services will be Saturday, at the funeral home. And of course, right now, the numbers are limited as who can be a part of the actual funeral homegoing service. I don't know if anything's going to be available. People can look at it on Facebook Live, whatever the case may be. But we this is tough times for us to be able to minister to families, but it's also a tough time for us to be able to show the support. And it's a tough time for families because not all family can even get together. This is just times that we're living in. Hopefully someone will maybe get a phone and record it, or, whatever the case may be. That, and I say this, and I'm going to say this right now. I am so grateful to God for the invention of Zoom and other platforms. During our kids' schooling this afternoon, I looked at the wife and I said, you know what? Can you imagine if we didn't have Zoom, what our children would be going through? What would we be dealing with? Can you imagine? She wouldn't be able to work. We would have no connection. So I thank God that we were prepared for this pandemic. We had no way of knowing it was coming. And if someone had prophesied and said it was coming, we probably wouldn't have believed them. Let's be honest. But because, as I said, our church, my job is to make certain that we are prepared for whatever. Because my philosophy is I'd rather have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. Now, when this first came along, when this first hit, the 15th of March, I could have been one of the ones saying, I ain't going, I ain't doing all this stuff. I'm going to trust God. And there would be no connection. We have not lost any connection with our church family. And do you all realize March 15th was the last day, the last Sunday we were all together? And the Lord has blessed us. We miss each other, but we are still able to connect because God allowed technology to come up with this Zoom, and there's Blue Jeans, and there's Google, and there's other platforms like this. But I just thank God that, one, we didn't demonize technology. We didn't demonize the internet. We didn't demonize none of this stuff that some folks, the reason why they don't fool with it is because they're not prepared. And so they lie and talk about all this other stuff being of the devil. No, it's not. No, it's not. Trust me, it's not. People are still getting the word on Sunday. Souls are still being saved. Spirits are still being lifted through these means. And I just thank God. And that's one thing I'm grateful and thankful of, that God has allowed these kind of platforms to exist so that we can worship and fellowship together. It's different. No question about it. But we're still able to make connection. We're still able to see each other. So I just